Professor, how do you see this situation? We have a government under serious pressure, Prime Minister under siege, really, the weakest opposition that in my political lifetime we have ever seen. None of the other parties making a breakthrough either. How did we get into such a sorry pass?
It's difficult, isn't it, George? The United Kingdom currently probably has the weakest government I've known in my lifetime. That's pretty much because we have the worst prime minister that one could imagine. Boris Johnson isn't a warmonger. He's not necessarily even personally financially corrupt. But Boris Johnson is just a person of absolutely zero honesty and zero honor and zero integrity. It is difficult to imagine a worse person to be prime minister. Now, Johnson says he has lots of ideas, but of course it's not a prime minister's job to have ideas. It's the prime minister's job to lead the country, to implement those ideas, to get his party and to get other parties and the country behind him. The UK is in a state of significant economic crisis. This is a really, really bad situation for the UK. It should be a situation in which the opposition parties, and particularly the Labour Party, are able to take advantage of this. But the Labour Party, frankly, has as a leader a man without a lot of charisma, Sir Keir Starmer, a man of great honesty and honour and integrity, but who doesn't really excite the voters very much. And so the Labour Party hasn't really been able to take advantage, as it should, of the absolute collapse of the authority of the government. We're also, of course, in a situation in which the leader of the opposition Labour Party is also currently under investigation by the police for having breached lockdown regulations. He says he hasn't, and he says he will resign if the police disagree with him. I believe he probably will resign. Unfortunately, we have a prime minister who definitely did breach lockdown regulations, who has been found guilty by the police of doing so and who's accepted a police fine, and yet who hasn't resigned.
Well, the Prime Minister has just won a vote of confidence from his parliamentary colleagues. Will he therefore be able to carry on, or will he fall at the hurdles like some of his predecessors did?
Yeah, well, Boris Johnson had the support of 59% of his MPs. That's not a lot. If we compare it to John Major and Margaret Thatcher, they, of course, had a greater level of support. Theresa May had a greater level of support, and she was gone in a matter of months. This is hardly a major vote of confidence when 41% of your MPs have voted against you. That's a bad thing. Remember, of course, if those people voted against him in a general vote of confidence in Parliament, and I'm not saying that they would, but if they did, if they voted the same way, then the government would collapse. This is not good for the country. The majority of members of Parliament do not believe that Boris Johnson should be Prime Minister. It's not a good thing for the country at all. Lots of people ask me, do I think Boris Johnson should be Prime Minister? Well, of course, I don't think he should be Prime Minister, but I want him to stay on as Prime Minister, because Boris Johnson being Prime Minister is the best chance that we have of a Labour government in this country, or a non-Conservative government in this country. Boris Johnson being Prime Minister is fantastic for me as a journalist, because there's so much to write about every week. But no, for the country, it's tragic. It's an embarrassment. Boris Johnson has been embarrassing the country since he became Prime Minister. Indeed, when he was Foreign Secretary, he was an embarrassment to the country. He is a liability for the Conservative Party in terms of their electoral prospects, but he's a real liability for the country and for the world in terms of his inability to show leadership. And he can't show leadership because people don't trust him, and they don't trust him because he is both dishonest and inconsistent. And so what's the point of making a deal with Boris Johnson? Nobody believes he will ever live up to it.
Well, Boris Johnson has won 3 elections against the grain, in the third case at least, the size of the victory. He twice won the mayoralty of London, overwhelmingly Labour city nowadays. And of course, he got a huge parliamentary majority but 3 years ago. Who on earth have the Conservatives got to replace such a man with?
So, yeah, Boris Johnson has in the past been, if not a great communicator, an amusing communicator. As Mayor of London, he was a figurehead. Not a great decision maker, but a good figurehead. He's quite good for the feel-good factor. He's quite a funny chap. He's very good on TV game shows. He's very amusing. What he isn't is an honest and honourable and trusted leader. The trouble is, of course, that like many weak leaders, he's surrounded himself with some very weak people. And there aren't any obvious people in the British Conservative Party, certainly senior in the Conservative Party, who could take over from him. The Conservative Party's own most preferred candidate is Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary. But Liz Truss is not at all popular in the country. She seems ineffective. She seems, frankly, like an overly enthusiastic schoolgirl in many occasions. She is not a great serious figure. She is not a Margaret Thatcher or a Theresa May. Now, I didn't like Thatcher or Theresa May, but they were serious politicians. Liz Truss doesn't seem like a serious politician. Who else is there? The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, the man who spent the Afghan crisis on holiday, didn't come home. And of course, the UK evacuation of Afghanistan went horribly, horribly wrong. And many people blame Dominic Raab. He was Foreign Secretary at the time. He was then demoted to Justice Secretary, but he insisted on being made Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic Raab is not exactly an intellectual heavyweight, nor indeed is Liz Truss. Having said that, there are some very good people actually in government at the moment, not white, and the Conservative Party is very, very unlikely to vote for a non-white leader. The current Education Secretary, of course, very competent at that, who formerly ran the vaccines campaign in Britain, showed very great confidence at that, I think would be a decent Prime Minister. I don't agree with him ideologically, but I think he'd be a competent Prime Minister. But unfortunately, it's unlikely that the Conservative Party would vote for a person like that. I think the British people would be perfectly happy to vote for a person of colour as Prime Minister. I'm just not convinced that the Conservative Party would do so. And therefore, they're really rather stuck. They've got a load of frankly incompetent and uninspiring white, middle-class, middle-aged people who are most likely to be voted as Tory leader, but who frankly wouldn't make a decent Prime Minister.